Hey, what is going on guys? This is Eli, and this time we are going to model this low poly car. Modeling cars can be one of the more difficult things to do, so because of that we're just going to focus on this very simple low poly car. It's probably one of the most simple cars you can create. So let's get started by creating a cube object, and we're going to enable the garage shading lines so we can see the segments. Let's add 5 segments on the x-axis, and we're going to make the cube editable. Now we can go and use the polygon mode to select all these top polygons, and we're going to move these down about 120 centimeters. This way the total object is just 80 centimeters. So the cube you're looking at right now is the hood of the car. So let's make this shape a bit more defined by going back to the polygon mode, and we're going to select both sides. And now we can use the Extrude tool, which you can access by pressing D on the keyboard or right-clicking and selecting the Extrude tool here. Let's make an extrusion of something like 30 centimeters. And now we can go to the edge mode, and we're going to select both of these top edges and move these down, let's say about 20 centimeters. Now this shape is a bit more defined. Let's continue with the back of the car. So a first thing we can do again is selecting the polygons at the back here. And the hood isn't supposed to be this long, so let's move these polygons to the left a bit, something like 20 centimeters will do. And now we can start making extrusions towards the back. I'm not going to do this with the Extrude tool because I think it is a bit slower to use. So instead we're just going to use this move tool, which is selected right now, and just hold Ctrl or Command on the keyboard while moving the polygons. So let's make a first extrusion with that Ctrl or Command key, and we're going to make it about 90 centimeters to the side. So this part will be the windshield and the first door. Now let's make a second extrusion towards the back, which will be the back window. So that one can be about 70 centimeters. Now let's make a last one, which will be 80 centimeters, and that one will be the trunk. Now we can go ahead and select these top polygons, and we are going to extrude these up. Something like 60 centimeters will do, I guess. Many people make it all the way up here. I think it's a bit out of proportion, so let's just stick with this for now. But if you want to, you can make it taller, it's up to you. Now let's also select these edges at the front. When you're using the move tool, you can also double click these edges to select the whole row of them. And we're going to move these back something like 20 centimeters. That should do. Let's also select these ones at the back and move these back just 10 centimeters. And maybe we can also move these down about 10 centimeters on both sides, maybe. Ooh. I guess this may just look fine. Maybe one more. Nah. Let's keep it like this. We're also going to select the 2 edges at the side here, on both sides. And we're going to use the scale tool, which you can access up here or press T. And let's just hold Shift while scaling on the x-axis, so the red axis. And let's stick with just 90% or 80%. It's up to you again. So I think this one can be up a bit higher, like this. Now let's make some extrusions on the windows, so there is a bit of depth on it. We're going to the polygon mode again, and let's select the ones at the front. Press I on the keyboard for the inner extrude tool, or right click again and select it there. And let's go for something like 4 centimeters of an extrusion. And now we can press D on the keyboard again for the extrude tool, and we're going to extrude inwards something like 4 centimeters as well. Now here at the back we want this to be separated, so an extrusion at this side and that side. So let's select both of them anyway and go to the inner extrude tool again, but this time deselect the preserve groups option. Make a new transformation and it should look like this. Let's go back to the extrude tool again and make yet another new transform. It should still have the same values, so that's nice. And we're going to repeat this on the other side as well. Now here at the back, we still want this to be one part, so on the inner extrusion, we need to reselect the preserve groups again. Okay, so that are the windows. We can do a similar thing at the front and the back of the car. So let's select these again. And in this case, at the front, we can make a separate grille part. So let's deselect these 3 by holding Ctrl or Command while selecting to deselect them. And so when we just have these 2 polygons at every side, we can make an inner extrusion again. The preserve groups option can be selected. And let's also extrude these inwards again. Now let's do the same thing with these 3 ones we left behind. And it should have a separate extrusion, so we have a frame around it. Let's go to the back and do the same thing, but this one can be just one piece. Okay, so that's just fine for now. Maybe we can already lower some of these parts at the front and the back. So let's hold click on this selection tool and change it to the rectangle selection tool. That makes it easier to select a whole group of points like this. So select all the top points, and we're going to move this down, let's say about 20 centimeters at the front and just 10 centimeters at the back. Oh. Okay, so that looks fine for now. Let's continue with the wheels. So for that we're going to use a tube object. Let's go in the settings of this, and we're going to change the orientation until it is pointing in the right direction. Of course we need to scale this down a lot, but I had some specific values for this tube, so let's just stick with that to save some time. Let's start with the outer radius, which was 32 centimeters, and the inner radius was 17 centimeters. It's also a bit of a long wheel right now, so let's change this to something like 25 centimeters. We're also going to add a fillet to this with just 2 steps, and it can be about 5 centimeters in radius. So that looks quite smooth, but maybe we want to make this a bit more low poly. So if you want to do that, you can lower the rotation segments to, for example, 12 segments. Okay, so that's one wheel. We can keep it up here for now, so the position is still at the center. It's a bit easier when we are adding more parts. So what we can do is already add the cover or the cap of the wheel, which is above it. So let's just make a copy of this tube and paste it. And the outer radius can be a bit bigger, of course. So let's start at 47 centimeters, and the inner radius can be just a bit bigger than the wheel. So let's go for something like 36 centimeters. Okay, so that's good. We can keep same kind of segments on the fillet, but we're going to decrease the rotation segments to just 8 of them. Now it's very low poly, but I'm doing this because we will slice this tube in half. So that means we have double the segments on just this top part. So let's go to the slice menu and click slice. And we're just going to play around with these values until it fits the top part of the wheel. You can also hold shift while doing this, so it moves in 10 degrees every time. So this will do. Now one more thing I would like to have is something at the center here. So let's create a cylinder object, and we're going to change the orientation again so it fits. Let's go for something like, let's see, 16, no. So maybe something like 8 centimeters on the radius. And you're going to make this a lot shorter, of course. So 16 centimeters, for example. We can just move it back inwards if it's needed. Let's go to the caps tab, and we're going to add a fillet to this as well, with 2 segments on 2.5 centimeters. So that's half of the wheel. And it should be placed nicely at this position. Now we need some kind of connections towards the wheel. So maybe we can do that with a cube object inside of a cloner. But for now, let's make this cube a lot smaller so we can see what's going on. And we're going to add a cloner where we change the mode to radial. Let's add the cube inside of it and make sure the orientation is set correctly again. So ZY can work for this. And we're going to decrease the radius to just 0 centimeters. Now let's play around with the size of the cube. So we don't need to change the X value. So let's go back to something like even just 10 centimeters. And I think it will be the Y value, but let's also lower the Z value so they are not as thick. So maybe we can go for 4 centimeters or just 2 centimeters even. Or maybe 1. Let's stick with that. And just increase the Y value until they connect with the wheel. Now we want more of them. So let's go back to the cloner object and increase the count to something like 15 or anything you like. Okay, so that looks good. So the combination of all these shapes can be grouped together by selecting them and pressing Alt and G. Let's rename this to wheel, and we can move this around so it is positioned at the right place. Let's make just another one towards the back. You can do this again by holding Ctrl or Command again while moving. So that's the copy and paste option, you could say. So that looks nice. Let's continue with some other parts. Maybe we can add a bit of a seam at the door here. So let's go to the edge mode and select the main frame of the car. And we're going to select these 3 edges. Now let's right click and go to the bevel mode. And we're going to change the bevel mode to solid. This way we don't have any depth on this, but just new edges. But these are way too big, so let's go for just an offset of 1 cm. So we have this very thin line. And now we can go to the polygon mode again and select all these polygons at the center. Okay, so when that is done, maybe you can also select these at the top here. And we're going to use the extrude tool again to move these inwards a bit. So it doesn't need to be a specific value, just click and drag until it looks right. Okay, so that's done. Now let's continue with some parts at the front here. Maybe we can change this grille. So let's select the car again, and we're going to use the point mode maybe with the rectangle selection tool to select these points and move these inwards like 10 centimeters, and do the same thing on the other side as well. So that's a bit more of an interesting shape. Now we can add the grille in here. I'm just going to do this manually, it's not that big of a deal. So let's add a cube, and we're going to make this something like 2 centimeters on every side again, but it can be a bit taller. And I'm just going to move this in position manually and go from there. So this is one piece, maybe we can use 4 centimeters anyway. And I'm just going to make manual duplicates every 10 centimeters again. This could be done with a cloner, but I think it's just faster doing it this way. Let's also select all these cubes and group them together to be a bit cleaner. Now we can add these lamps at the front. So what you can do for this is making a sphere object and a cylinder object. Let's do that at the same time, so they're at the same position and the same size. We're going to scale down this radius of the sphere, so let's take a look at the cylinder. The radius of the cylinder is 50 centimeters, so the radius of the sphere can also be 50 centimeters. Let's move this up. If you would like to use the scale tool to flatten this sphere, it will not work, it will stay in proportion. But if you click and hold this button and change the mode to object mode, you can scale it out of proportion. Let's also increase the radius a bit, so it's a bit bigger towards the sides. And of course we can change the height to anything that's a bit more in proportion. So this can be a light. Let's group this together, and we can also change back to this model mode. Let's rotate this. And of course we are going to scale this down so it can actually fit at the front of the car. Okay, so that will do. Also notice I'm just working on this side of the car, because we will use some symmetry to copy all of these parts to the other side of the car. You could also cut this car in half at the very center and use the symmetry object to mirror all of this to the other side, but I think this car is just so simple that it's easier to keep it as one object. So that part is done. Now let's make a duplicate of this maybe and use it as an indicator at the side. We can also add a cube to make a door handle right here. It's just a very small and thin cube. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. And maybe we can also use this cube to make a mirror at the side here. So this cube is already close to that position. That's why we can do it that way. So let's go with round numbers again to make it a bit easier. We can already make a second copy of this for the actual mirror. And maybe we can also add a fillet on this. So just 2 subdivisions, and maybe just 2 centimeters will do. Let's move it in. And this one can be a bit smaller now. And we can also rotate this one cube and move it towards the car. Okay. Now one more cube we can use is at the back to make the backlights. It can be anything you like. You can use round lights, you can use cube lights like this one. But we're also going to add that same kind of fillet to this. Okay, so that looks nice. Now let's add some bumpers at the front and the back, so it's not as empty right here. So we are going to start with a cube object again, and let's make this just 10 centimeters on every side. Let's move it to the bottom and the front. And we're going to make this editable, so we can select these polygons at the sides here. And let's use the extrude tool again to make some extrusions to every side. And let's just do this manually by clicking and dragging. So I think we can go with 130 centimeters to keep it a round number. And let's make a second one by clicking and dragging again, and let's change the value to 10 centimeters again, so we have a perfect cube at every side. And now let's select these polygons at the inner side, and we're going to make yet another extrusion Something like just 20 centimeters will do. Okay, so that looks nice. Maybe we can make this a bit more defined and smoother. You can do that by using the Bevel Deformer and drag it under this new cube object we created. So that's the bumper. But you can also notice some weird shading right here. So make sure you select this use angle option to get rid of that. We can also set some more subdivisions on this. Something like 2 or maybe just 1 will do, because it's a very small bevel. It doesn't connect with the car just yet, so maybe we can already add another cube on this. This one can be about 20 on every side. And we can also add a fillet to this with just 2 segments and 2 centimeters. And move this towards the front again and under the lamp. And we're also going to make this a bit longer, so it connects the car with the bumper. We can also just keep this on one side, because we will use the symmetry again to copy it to the other side. Let's copy this bumper with the cube object, and we're going to place this copy at the back side. Let's rotate this so it points to the right direction. Maybe you can also raise this up a bit to get a different look. Now one more thing we need to do is adding some holes behind the wheels, because it does look a bit weird right now. So I think an easy way to do this is just using the cylinders we have at the center of the wheels right here. That's an easy way to do it. And we're going to copy these and paste these outside of there. And let's disable the fillet on the caps. And we're going to change the radius of this to something like 36 centimeters. That should cover the hole. And we can also play around with the rotation segments. So 16 is just right to fit the wheel cap. We can also make this a bit deeper, like this. And for this one, we're also going to make 2 more duplicates to the other side just now, because we will manually cut these out. So let's group all of these parts together. And we're going to make a bool object, so we can drag that part under there. And let's also find the cube object, which is the car, and drag it under there as well. Make sure it's the top one, so that way we have the nice cut. And it should be just fine like this. Okay, so I think all the modeling parts are kind of done. Maybe we can just add a quick license plate at the front and the back. These are just cubes again, so nothing special. And now we can start adding the symmetry to the other side with all these small parts. So let's make sure we have the symmetry object. And now we need to find every part that should be inside of here. But first, let's create a new null and drag it under the symmetry object, so all the parts can be inside of that null. Because the symmetry object only makes symmetry on the first object below it. So if you add all the separate parts in there, it would not work. So let's just add all the parts that should be at the other side as well. Okay, so that seemed to work. Now we are done with the model. Let's continue with adding some lights. This isn't too difficult, it's just a very simple light setup, but it looks really nice in my opinion. So let's start out with an infinite light. And we're going to rotate this a bit to the side and a bit downwards. So pointing towards us, you could say. We can still adjust this later. But for now, let's change the settings of this. And we can use a ray traced shadow for this maybe. Let's change the intensity to 120%, so it's a bit brighter. And we can also add a bit of a warmer color to this. Now, let's also make sure we have a floor object, so it's sitting on something and can create some shadows on there. It will be dark right now, like this, so we don't want that. So to fix that, let's create yet another light. And we can go to the bottom here and check the ambient illumination option. And we're also going to add an ambient occlusion effect at the render settings. And let's see how this looks now. So that's a bit brighter. And one more thing I like to do is adding an environment object to this. Let's change the value of this to something close to the 70% range. So with that environment object, it's even a bit softer, but that will be in our advantage when we add some colors. So let's get started with doing that. Our first material will be for the floor. And I can already tell that all the materials will have the reflectance channel disabled. This helps in the low poly look, and we don't want it to be too shiny. It can have this kind of flat look even. So make sure you disable that channel on every material from here on. So for the color for the floor, we are going to use a very dark gray with some blue mixed into it. Let's drag it on the floor. Now maybe it's also a good thing to enable the interactive render region to see how it actually looks. So you can see the pretty dark gray of the material is a lot lighter in the actual render. So you should keep that in mind. Let's continue and create a second material, which will be for the car. So this can be any color you like, of course, but I'm going with a kind of blue color. Let's disable the reflectance again, of course. And one more thing you can do on just this color or this material for the car is adding a Fresnel texture on this. This gives a kind of special look to it. So let's change the mix mode to add. And we're also going to make this a bit softer, so 10% maybe. And let's drag it on the car and see how this looks. So let's make the Fresnel a bit stronger to see the difference. So you can see without that it's very flat, but if we add that 10% of Fresnel, it gets this more dynamic lighting on the car, which is something we like, of course. So let's make sure the materials are also on the other parts. Maybe if you want to drag it on here, you have to disable that symmetry object just to make things a bit easier. Okay, let's continue with the material for the windows, because they don't need to be blue, of course. This will be a kind of dark gray with a purple tone in it. That may feel like a strange thing to do, but it looks good, so let's stick with that. And we're going to select the car object under the bool object. And with the polygon tool, we can select all the polygons that should be windows. And just drag the material on top of that. Okay, looking good. Let's continue with the material for the wheels. This will also be a similar color, but a bit darker and also a bit more purple. Let's create a new material which will be for the metal parts. So this will be yet another similar thing, but a bit softer on the gray spectrum and also not as purple. This can be used for maybe the wheel caps and stuff. Let's also make a second duplicate of this, which will be an alternative version of the metal. So we have a bit of difference, and we're just going to make this even brighter. We can use this for the other parts, like the bumpers. Or maybe we want it to be the other way around, so let's try that. Yeah, I think this will look better. Maybe we can use a lighter material on the cloner parts here inside of the wheels. Like this. Yeah, I think that looks better. So let's add the original on the back here. And also here at the mirrors. We can also just make a white material for the license plates. Let's also make sure we have the material on the grills right here. So we can just do that on the group of bars. Now let's continue with a new material for the lamps, which will be a very soft grayish yellow. We are also going to make a second one for the indicators. This one will be orange, of course. Can also be quite soft. And now we need one more for the ones at the back. So these will be a kind of soft red. So you can notice it's all very soft colors, but it looks nice. So try to stick with that kind of color theme if you want to have something that looks like mine. Okay, so I think that's all the materials we need. So let's enable the symmetry again to complete this. And now one more thing we can do is adding a special camera to this. So add the camera object and we're going to look through this. And we're going to change the projection to anything you want, of course, but let's go with parallel to get the exact same result as we had with my preview. So let's take a final render of this and see how this looks. And that looks nice. You could also notice how fast this renders, so it's an ideal setup for animations. Okay, so that was all there was to creating this car. If you want to take a look at the original file of me, you can download that in the description, it's free. And with that being said, I hope you learned something new today, and I will see you in the next video.